Good afternoon. Good morning to everyone on the West Coast. I'm Nate Balis, Director of the Juvenile Justice Strategy Group at the Annie E. Casey Foundation. And on behalf of the Casey Foundation and our colleagues from the Columbia Justice Lab, I want to welcome you to Youth Justice at a Crossroads. Thank you for joining us for what I think should be a great 2.5-hour event. As two organizations working to promote youth justice reform around the country, our teams began talking about this event about a few months ago as we were both feeling what the title of this event implies, that we're at a pivotal moment in youth justice, a crossroads, because after many years of having the wind at our backs, an environment which created consistently fertile ground for creative and ambitious reform efforts, things just feel a bit more complex right now. Over the last 3 years, juvenile justice systems, communities, and young people have gone through a lot. The deadly and disruptive pandemic, nationwide racial justice protests, waves of highly contentious school closures and reopenings, guns saturating many communities, and mental health distress that fell especially hard on young people. The list goes on and on. Now, with that backdrop, it's not surprising to read headlines each morning and feel kind of pulled in many different directions, good and bad. So we're here today to talk about that, to get into it. After our keynote address by Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Administrator Liz Ryan, we'll have breakout sessions focused on addressing big challenges. First, in the short term, JT Timpson from Roca in Baltimore and John Choi, the county attorney in Ramsey County, Minnesota, will focus on responding to youth violence and guns in ways that help and don't harm. My Casey Foundation colleague, Tom Woods, and Maryland Department of Juvenile Services Secretary, Vinny Schiraldi, will discuss capacity challenges in facilities and communities. And after that, we'll touch on these same topics, but focusing more long-term. Albino Garcia of La Placita Institute in New Mexico and Simone Fuller from Impact Justice's Restorative Justice Project will focus on building the capacity of communities, families, and young people to thrive, knowing they can live, work, play, learn, grow without fear of violence. And Clinton Lacey from the Credible Messenger Mentoring Movement and Judge Catherine Lucero from California's Office of Youth and Community Restoration will discuss right-sizing systems to deliver effective interventions where, when, and how they will do the most good. Now, we'll provide instructions, more instructions throughout the event, but the big point is that you'll get to choose which of those sessions you'll want to attend. So, but first, we're really fortunate to have Liz Ryan here to kick us off. Liz became administrator of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention on May 16, 2022, following appointment by President Biden. Prior to leading OJJDP, Liz was president and CEO of the Youth First Initiative, a national campaign focused on ending the incarceration of youth by investing in community-based alternatives. Liz founded the Youth First Initiative in 2014, and under her leadership, it achieved the closure of youth prisons in 6 states and redirected more than $50 million to community-based alternatives to incarceration. Liz founded the Campaign for Youth Justice in 2005 and served as its president and CEO until 2014. The National Multi-State Initiative sought to end the prosecution of youth and adult criminal courts and the placement of youth in adult jails and prisons. And during her tenure, the campaign's work led to legislative and policy changes in more than 30 states, a 60% decrease in the number of youth in adult courts, and a greater than 50% decrease in the number of youth placed in adult jails and prisons. A staunch advocate for youth, Liz co-founded and co-chaired Act for Juvenile Justice, a campaign to reauthorize the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. She also served as advocacy director for the Youth Law Center, national field director for OJJDP's Juvenile Court Centennial Initiative, and as an advocate for the Children's Defense Fund. She has written extensively about juvenile justice reform, including articles, editorials, reports, and chapters of books. If it's not clear from all of that, we are incredibly fortunate to have Liz here with us today, and we're really fortunate to have her at the helm of OJJDP, bringing her values, her depth of knowledge, and her leadership skills to the Justice Department. I honestly can't wait to hear from her. So enough from me. Liz, take it away.
Thank you so much, Nate. It's really an honor to join you all this afternoon for this really important and timely conversation. I want to thank the Annie E. Casey Foundation and also Columbia Justice Lab for extending the invite for me to join you. You all are tackling difficult topics and facing challenges, and I'm really inspired by your willingness to engage in conversation to find some solutions to what we're all dealing with. One of the topics that I understand you're concerned about is violence, young people's exposure to violence, young people engaging in it, youth victims, and especially kids carrying guns. On Friday, I had the opportunity to meet with our youth violence prevention grantees from across the country and to talk about these exact topics. I co-facilitated a panel with young people who shared their concerns and their perspectives about these issues. What did I hear from the young people? I heard that the young people told me we need more safe spaces where our voices can be heard and we can be kids. The young people also said they wanted individualized support, not cookie cutter solutions. They especially want support with mental health and to close the gap in long waiting times to access those services. They want activities that they're engaged in and interested in and have a voice in deciding. The young people want us to hire people from their communities that they can trust, they can relate to, credible messengers. They also want us to reach out to them in ways that really are applicable to them. So they want us not to use old school flyers, but to use Instagram and other social media. More importantly, they want us to be consistent. They want us to be genuine. They want us to show up and they want us to do the actual work. In some, they asked us to be solution oriented. So this conversation right now could not be more timely. For me, talking with the young people really underscored the critical importance of asking young people what is going on, what do they think, what do they need, what solutions are they proposing, and how can they be involved in the solution. So some questions I think we're going to be talking about today, but for us to really think about that will help guide us are questions like this. Are we creating meaningful opportunities for young people to share their perspectives with us about what's going on and what some of the solutions are? What are young people in our communities telling us about why they may feel the need to be carrying guns and other weapons? Are we regularly talking with young people in our communities about what would make them feel safer? Do we know what young people need from us? And if we do, what are we doing to implement the solutions that they're doing? And how are we involving young people in the development of those solutions? Another topic that you all have identified is what's happened during the pandemic around youth crime. Some of your jurisdictions have reported an uptick in youth crime, and some of you are concerned about potential reports of efforts to roll back juvenile justice reforms. OJJDP has national data through 2020, and it's really important context to consider as you think about this and make sure that this information is accessible in your jurisdictions. And that is to look at not just the past 2 or 3 years, but to look at the past 25 years, right? What does the data show us about youth arrests, about youth detention, about youth commitment? The trend has really been a dramatic reduction in all of 3 of those. Youth arrests have gone down over the 20-year period between 2020 and, between 2000 and 2020. And the same thing with youth detention and youth arrests. Now, we know we don't have the most updated data nationally for the past 3 years, but what we need to think about is that if there has been an uptick in some places, that's not a reason to roll back juvenile justice reforms. In fact, we know now more about what works to support young people than we did 25 years ago. So it's really it's actually a reason for us to double down, to really invest in what works for young people. So some of the questions we should be considering around this topic are, how are we collecting and sharing examples of what works to support young people, what works to keep young people free from crime and violence and to stay out of the juvenile justice system? What ways are we ensuring that public officials are accessing that information? And how are we engaging directly impacted youth and their families as part of the public discussion on this in our communities? We should also be asking, what kind of contact do we have with news outlets, particularly news reporters and editorial boards, and how are we ensuring that they're accessing the information about what works, especially from a broader array of perspectives across our communities. Finally, one of the topics that has been noted also is about staffing issues in juvenile detention and juvenile corrections. And as I mentioned earlier, juvenile detention and corrections have been decreasing over the past 20 years. Now, we have data again through 2020, and between 2000 and 2020, it showed a dramatic reduction in both of those areas. So we want to be asking some questions in this space around what is this an indication of, right? The staffing issue. Is this an indication of working conditions within detention and corrections? Some of the research that we see tells us that these are not positive environments for young people, let alone people who were working there. And it should really give us pause to expand places where adults don't even want to work, right? Why would we expand those kinds of places for kids if adults don't want to work there? So we need to ask ourselves whether we're doing enough to be prepared for the jobs of the future in our field, right? So instead of recruiting people for the jobs of the past, right, where we incarcerated 4 times as many kids 20 some years ago than we do now, let's look at what kind of jobs we're really wanting the youth justice field to move towards. So this is an opportunity for all of us to shape what those jobs look like and to gear those jobs towards what young people are telling us that they need. So some questions for us to think about are, how are we creating safe spaces for youth to be young people in their communities? What new skills, qualities, and expertise can we put into the job descriptions for people that we want to hire in this space? Are we hiring people from local communities? And what kind of ways can we build capacity in order to do that? How will we recruit and train a future workforce using more of the research and practice on what works with young people? And what are ways that we can address some of the needs of young people that they're telling us about right now? Mental health services, right? And not having large gaps in waiting times for that. We want to be thinking about what ways can we shift dollars away from an outdated and unsafe architecture in our justice system and focusing investments on what the research shows us really works. And finally, we want to think about who else can we bring to the table in this discussion to help us tackle these new challenges. Folks who know about workforce development, folks who are involved in human resources, community-based organizations, capacity building experts. We want to think more broadly than we have in the past. So I'm really excited to engage with you all in this dialogue and to pursue answers to some of these questions and the questions that are top of mind for all of you. And I want to really thank you for the courage to face challenges head on and for your solution-oriented approach. Our young people are coming to us to ask us to work with them to ensure their successful futures. And I know that together we can do this. So thank you so much for inviting me to join you today and to kick off what I'm excited to hear more about in this conversation.